Picture this. You're a young shepherd boy spending an ordinary summer morning on the hills of central Norway. Your sheep wander peacefully across the fields. But suddenly, somewhere in the distance, you catch a faint sound. At first, it's barely noticeable. Then another. Curious, you begin walking toward it. The closer you get, the clearer it becomes. The ringing of steel, shouting, war horns. Soon, a breathtaking and terrifying sight unfolds before your eyes. Across the valley below, two massive armies are preparing for battle. Years later, you would learn that one side was led by Olaf Haraldsson, King of Norway. On the other stood an alliance of powerful local chieftains and their followers. Thousands of Norwegians had gathered here to decide the future of their kingdom. The upcoming battle would be so significant that even the gods themselves would watch from the heavens, eclipsing the sun. Old gods facing new. Would Olaf succeed in Christianizing Norway? Or had fate prepared a different destiny for him? While the young shepherd boy watches the battle begin, we can talk about the reasons behind it. At the end of the 10th century, Norway was not a unified kingdom. It was a collection of regions controlled by local chieftains and powerful noble families. The king's authority was limited, and many areas operated almost independently. Olaf grew up in this world of rival clans and constant warfare. Like many Scandinavian nobles of his era, he spent much of his youth abroad. Medieval sources described him fighting across the Baltic Sea, participating in raids, and gaining military experience throughout Northern Europe. He eventually joined campaigns in England, where Viking armies fought both for and against Anglo-Saxon rulers. By the time he reached adulthood, Olaf had become an experienced warrior with a reputation for leadership and ambition. Around the year 1015, he returned to Norway with a clear goal: to become king. Over the next few years, Olaf succeeded in uniting much of the country under his rule. But unlike many previous Viking rulers, he wasn't interested only in power. He wanted to transform Norway itself. One of Olaf's greatest ambitions was to transform Norway into a unified Christian kingdom. But that was far easier said than done. For centuries, the country had been divided between powerful local chieftains who ruled their lands with considerable independence. Many Norwegians still followed the Old Norse gods, and loyalty to local leaders often mattered more than loyalty to any king. Olaf believed Christianity could help unite the kingdom under a single authority. Throughout the early years of his reign, he traveled across Norway together with priests and missionaries, promoting the new faith and strengthening royal power. The response was mixed. In the southern regions of Norway, where trade with England and Denmark had already exposed many people to Christianity, resistance was often limited. Other regions proved far more difficult. According to the Saga of Olaf Haraldsson, one of the most serious challenges came in 1018, when Olaf traveled through Romerike and continued his efforts to strengthen royal authority. Several local leaders reportedly met in secret and began discussing a conspiracy against the king. The plot did not remain secret for long. When Olaf learned of the gathering, he acted immediately. The conspirators were arrested before they could move against him. Some were exiled. Others received brutal punishments. Whether every detail is historically accurate is impossible to verify, but the story reflects an important reality. Even during his own lifetime, Olaf had become a deeply divisive ruler. To his supporters, he was building a stronger Norway. To his enemies, he was destroying ancient traditions and concentrating power in his own hands. The situation only grew worse during the 1020s. While Olaf struggled to consolidate his kingdom, a far more powerful ruler was expanding his influence across Northern Europe. His name was Canute the Great. By this time, Canute ruled both England and Denmark. His resources dwarfed those available to Olaf. More importantly, he understood that Norway could be won without a major invasion. According to several medieval accounts, Canute began winning over influential Norwegian leaders with promises, gifts, and silver. One by one, powerful chieftains drifted away from Olaf and toward the Danish king. By 1028, Olaf's position had become untenable. When Canute arrived in Norway with a large fleet, resistance collapsed. Many of the men Olaf had once relied upon refused to support him. The king fled east. His destination was the court of Yaroslav the Wise in Novgorod. For nearly 2 years, Olaf remained in exile while Canute's supporters controlled Norway. For most rulers, this would have been the end. For Olaf, it became the beginning of his final chapter. In 1030, he decided to return. According to Snorri Sturluson, Olaf gathered a force of roughly 3,000 men before marching back toward Norway. Some were loyal followers. Others were adventurers seeking wealth and opportunity. A number were recent recruits with little connection to the king himself. As Olaf advanced, support failed to materialize on the scale he had hoped. Instead, opposition grew. Local leaders began gathering forces to stop him. Among the most important were Kalv Arneson and Thorir Hund, two men whose names would become permanently linked with Olaf's death. Thorir Hund had personal reasons to hate the king. Years earlier, Olaf's actions had contributed to the death of Thorir's nephew, Asbjorn Selsbane. According to the sagas, Thorir never forgave him. The two armies finally met near Stiklestad on July 29, 1030. The exact number of warriors remains unknown. Medieval sources often exaggerate army sizes. What most historians agree upon is that Olaf faced a larger force composed primarily of Norwegian farmers, local leaders, and their followers. According to the most reasonable modern estimates, Olaf's army likely numbered between 2,000 and 4,000 men. The coalition of chieftains, meanwhile, appears to have enjoyed a significant numerical advantage, fielding somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 warriors. Olaf arranged his men in a wedge formation designed to break through the enemy line. Across the field, the opposing force formed a massive shield wall. As both sides prepared for combat, something unusual happened. Olaf was waiting for reinforcements under Dagur Hringsson. The wait became so long that the king eventually lay down and fell asleep. Then, word arrived that the enemy army was advancing. His men rushed to wake him. Olaf appeared strangely calm. When asked what he had been dreaming about, he described a great ladder reaching into the heavens. He had climbed higher and higher until he reached the final step. To later generations, the meaning seemed obvious. The king had seen a vision of his own death. Soon afterward, the battle began. Olaf's wedge smashed into the opposing shield wall with tremendous force. At first, his men made significant progress, pushing deep into enemy ranks. But as the fighting continued, the numerical advantage of the opposing army began to tell. The king's formation became increasingly isolated. Pressure mounted from multiple directions. Then came one of the most famous moments in the entire story. According to later traditions, the sky suddenly darkened. One moment, the battlefield was illuminated by the summer sun. The next, an unnatural darkness began spreading across the sky. Many warriors stopped and looked upward in disbelief. For Christians, the darkening sky may have recalled the darkness said to have followed the death of Christ. For those who still followed the Old Norse gods, it could only be interpreted as an omen. Some may have seen it as the one eye of Odin himself watching the battle unfold, while others might have feared it was a sign of Ragnarok, the doom of gods and men foretold in Norse mythology. Modern astronomy confirms that a solar eclipse was visible in Scandinavia during 1030, although historians continue to debate whether it occurred on the exact day of the battle or became attached to the story afterward. Whatever the truth may be, The effect on the men fighting below must have been extraordinary. For a few moments, warriors on both sides stared at the darkened sky. Then the killing resumed. Amid the confusion, Olaf found himself near the center of the fighting. The king had spent much of the battle at the front of his formation, encouraging his men and personally taking part in the struggle. Olaf soon came face to face with Thorir Hund. The king struck first. His sword crashed into Thorir's armor but failed to cut through. Some sources claim Thorir wore a thick reindeer hide tunic beneath his mail, which absorbed much of the blow. Before Olaf could strike again, another enemy reached him. His name was Thorstein Knarsmed. Years earlier, Olaf had seized one of Thorstein's ships. Now the carpenter finally had a chance to settle the score. Thorstein swung his axe and struck the king above the knee. The wound was severe. One of Olaf's followers immediately cut Thorstein down, but the damage had already been done. Seeing the wounded king struggle to keep his footing, Thorir Hund seized the opportunity. He drove his spear into Olaf's body. The king staggered backward. Blood began pouring from his wounds. Then came the final blow. Kalv Arnason stepped forward and struck Olaf with his sword. The king of Norway collapsed. After years of war, conquest, exile, and struggle, Olaf Haraldsson lay dying on the battlefield of Stiklestad. The king used his remaining strength to pray before finally losing consciousness. Shortly before noon, Olaf was dead. Almost immediately, word began spreading through the battlefield. The king had fallen. Yet the battle itself was not over. As sunlight slowly returned and the eclipse faded from the sky, reinforcements under Dagur Hringsson finally arrived. Seeing Olaf's banner still standing above the fighting, they charged directly into the exhausted army of the Bondis. The attack was devastating. Dagur's men cut through the enemy ranks and inflicted heavy casualties. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the battle might still be saved. But Olaf was already dead. Without the king, there was no one left capable of holding the army together. Kalv Arnason, Thorir Hund, and the other leaders rallied their men and launched a counterattack. Their numerical advantage was simply too great. One by one, Olaf's remaining formations collapsed. Among those wounded during the final stages of the battle was Olaf's 15-year-old half-brother, Harald Sigurdsson. The young warrior survived. Years later, the world would know him by another name, Harald Hardrada. By the end of the day, the battlefield belonged to Olaf's enemies. His attempt to reclaim Norway had ended in complete failure. Yet, what happened next would transform a defeated king into one of the most famous figures in Scandinavian history. Stories soon began spreading that strange things had happened after Olaf's death. Miracles were reported near his body. Others claimed the king's blood possessed healing properties. Whether these stories were true or not mattered less than the fact that people believed them. The reputation of the fallen king grew rapidly. Only 1 year later, Olaf was declared a saint. The man who had been driven from Norway by his own people became Saint Olaf, the patron saint of Norway. It was an extraordinary reversal. At Stiklestad, his enemies had won the battle, but history would remember Olaf as the victor. The very men who had once risked their lives fighting against Olaf and his forced Christianization would themselves embrace Christianity only a few years after the battle. More than 1,000 years later, millions of people still know the name of Olaf Haraldsson. The king who lost his throne, lost his battle, and lost his life ultimately won something far more enduring, a place in history. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments which historical figure or battle you would like to see next. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.